Hello and a very warm welcome to Meghan and Harry News YouTube channel. Over the years it has mentioned, usually by the toxic tabloid media, I have heard draw comparisons between Mr. and Mrs. Simpson and Meghan and Harry, and here we see again this tired comparison being brought up, and it's always brought up in order to paint them in a negative light, when really there is no comparison, it's all very different. As you can see here, Prince Harry and Meghan Markle could become very unhappy and insignificant, warns expert. Yes, I know, another so-called expert has been let out on the loose. Royal author Tom Quinn has compared Prince Harry and Meghan Markle to former King Edward VIII and his wife Wallis Simpson, saying the Sussexes risk becoming insignificant and unhappy. Tom Quinn, who wrote the newly released book Gilded Youth, has drawn similarities between the Duke and Duchess of Sussex and former King Edward VIII and his wife Wallis Simpson. According to the expert, after sharing their experiences through interviews, books and documentaries, Harry and Meghan will not have much else to say, and the public will no longer be interested. Mr. Quinn said the Sussexes could face the same fate as Edward VIII and Wallis Simpson, whose intention to marry caused a constitutional crisis that forced the king to abdicate. Now, first off, the comparison here is completely out of whack. One was the king. Harry is not the king. He's not going to become king. So there is no comparison. Edward abdicated because he was told he couldn't marry the person he wanted to. So he abdicated. He abdicated the throne in order to marry divorcee Wallis Simpson, and became known as the Duke of Windsor. You could say he chose love over becoming king. Now, Harry and Meghan, on the other hand, left the royal family. They didn't abdicate, they resigned, they quit, they were hounded by the media and the press as working members of the royal family, and that is one of the reasons they quit, while Mr. and Mrs. Simpson were hounded after he abdicated. Very different. The so-called expert goes on to say that Meghan and Harry could face the same fate as Mr. and Mrs. Simpson. This is presuming that Edward and Wallis Simpson regretted their decision. There's no real answer to this, but we could also estimate he didn't regret his decision, as that decision allowed him to spend the rest of his life with the woman he wanted to marry, as opposed to becoming king and then regretting not getting married to the woman he wanted. Anyway, this article continues with the royal expert saying, when you're not saying that anymore and you can't make any more films and interviews about how badly you've been treated, what then? What do you do? My fear is that Harry will become like Edward VIII and Meghan will become like Mrs. Simpson. He added, they lived in this beautiful house in France and we know they were desperately unhappy. Well, no you don't. You don't know if they were desperately unhappy, and you certainly have no idea how unhappy he and they would have become had they decided to become king and give up the woman he loved. It continues, Edward VIII was a bit like King Lear, where he gives away all his power, but somehow thinks he can still exercise power through his children. And I think Edward VIII, when he abdicated and went to live in France, thought he would still be an important figure. And he was for a little while, in the same way that Meghan and Harry are kind of significant now, because there's so much coverage and commentary about them. But that will fade, and unless they can escape all this negative stuff and find something positive that people are interested in, they will become insignificant in the way that Edward VIII became insignificant and very unhappy. Again, presuming they were unhappy. The toxic media and reporters and these so-called experts like this one want to give the impression that power, wealth and material matters are all important, and love and relationships and happiness come second. This is the backward way they look at things. They have their values upside down. It's all about power and fame to these people. They can't understand someone turning down power and fame. They believe the biggest fear for someone is becoming insignificant and not talked about in the media. This is what they consider to be valuable and of merit, publicity and power, when the real power, the real prize is love. And that's what should be someone's priority, not their career, not their job, not wealth, not power, not silly titles that mean nothing, not mansions and fancy cars. Let me know your opinion below in the comments, and I'll see you in the next video.